Okay, good morning, everybody. What I'm going to talk about today is my experiences in actually coaching and mentoring senior leaders within education across Wales. So primarily head teachers, but also other people in schools. So it could be senior leaders in special educational needs. It could be Elencos. So really the coaching and mentoring pilot has been open to all sorts of people, really. And probably 25, 30 senior leaders have actually benefited from the project and the program. But what I want to talk about is the first session. So let's imagine you're in that situation. You get allocated a head teacher as a coachee in a confidential way, so they could be working in another region. So obviously you're going to schedule your meeting over Zoom or over Teams. And what this main session is about is that first conversation. And the most important thing for heads is one, developing that trust and respect and that rapport. So what I would encourage you to do is probably spend 30 minutes of the first session. If you have an hour and a half session, but spend the first 30 minutes on developing rapport, we tend to call that the harmony session. And the first thing I tend to do is talk a little bit about my experience of coaching and mentoring, how long I've been an executive coach, etc. But what that does, that develops something called believability and credibility in the head. So the head is then in a safe space. So they then think, right, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. But then what I do is I play something called the you game. I want to find out about the head, about their personal lives and their sort of work lives. And there's two questions that I always open up with. And I always say, right, okay, these coaching and mentoring sessions are about you. What's said in this room is completely confidential. But the first thing I need to know is what's a personal goal? What's something that you need to achieve in 3 years' time in your personal life? What that does, then that actually gives me a focus on something that they want to achieve. So it could be just to be happy, one head said, yes. So that was fantastic. So then we explored that, looked at what she needed to do to make her happy. And that was addressing the mental health and well-being issues which she faced in her personal life, but the work life links into that. So if they can then get enough thinking space to then have a really good work-life balance, that puts them in a really good place. And then the next question I ask is, what is a work goal, something that you want to achieve in 3 years' time in your work life? And the responses will be different. So some might say, I want to go from good to excellent on my next ESTIN. Some will say, I want to change the culture within the school. Some will say that I potentially want to change roles. I want to become a head teacher of a different type of school. So you're going to come across a whole range of different sort of answers. But what you'll find in these sessions is they're not just coaching or they're not just mentoring sessions. Sometimes they're a combination of the two. So what is often a good place to start with is by explaining exactly what coaching is and exactly what mentoring is. But then often the conversation will turn into something called a developmental conversation, which is obviously looking at that reflective space piece. But the way the developmental conversation may work, so imagine, let's say I have a head teacher, let's call her Jane, and we're half an hour into that first session, and I might say, right, okay, Jane, what's the first thing you need to focus on? And she might say, well, okay, the first thing I look at is my own mental health and well-being. So then we might come up with a range of strategies to help Jane's mental health and well-being. What that will then do, that puts her in a really fantastic space to become a better head teacher and actually help develop the teachers, teaching and learning staff further, engage with the wider community, look at their performance within the school. So that would be the first stage of it, but that might be a mentoring conversation or a coaching conversation. So let's then take that theme further. So then another head teacher said, right, okay, we've fixed the work-life balance things. Next thing we need to consider is, what can I do to engage my staff in the school to develop a coaching and mentoring culture? So then my answer would be, right, okay, well, when's your next inset day? So they might say middle May. So we talk about the inset day, but then what we look at is potentially structuring that day in positioning coaching and mentoring within the school as a way of actually enhancing coaching and mentoring as a developmental medium, which the teaching and learning staff can then use to then develop the children. Then when we've framed that day, often the head teacher will use a whole range of different tools which we use at Results Driven to develop teams and some of the things which you've used on the coaching and mentoring program. So often I might have 2 or 3 sessions with the head working up that session to see what it looks like, feels like, and sounds like. The head will then go away and facilitate that day. We'll then have a coaching session after that day, and then we'll get some feedback, and then we'll break it down and we'll say, right, okay, how did it go? Did everything go to plan? Did things fall over, or did it achieve what you wanted to achieve? And I would say 9.5 times out of 10, it goes exactly to plan. Another really good example is in Wales, you have to have annual performance conversations with your senior leadership teams within schools. I've never agreed with the language around these performance management conversations because I think managing performance are the wrong words to use. So I tend to use these words as developmental conversations. So one head teacher actually changed the focus of the conversation from being a performance management conversation into being one which was based around a developmental conversation. So on the Friday, she had 5 meetings with her senior leadership team. And she said she was inundated with emails all over the weekend saying that was absolutely fantastic. It was the best performance management conversations which they'd had, but they agreed with that change in terminology. So what I would say to you is once you've developed that trust and that respect and that rapport, once the session actually starts moving forward, you might move in and out of a coaching and mentoring style. Because what they're looking for, sometimes they just want the answers. Sometimes they want coaching on to be able to come up with the answers for themselves. So it just depends on the head and where they are actually at that current moment in time. But the first session is the most important session. Once you've nailed that, sessions 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on how many the head actually needs, will vary in whether it's coaching or mentoring or a combination of the two or a developmental conversation. So hopefully that gives you an insight into becoming or developing the relationships with the heads across Wales.